Sexual wholeness is not about when or with whom you are allowed to get turned on. It's about your whole experience and expression of sexuality. Hi, I'm Dr. Kevin Jensen, a Bible scholar and sex educator helping Christian men experience sexual satisfaction instead of shame. The confusing culture wars around gender identity, sexual orientation, and non-monogamous relationships are the outcome of an ethical mistake that replaced biblical accuracy with a false assumption. Because this error in biblical interpretation has been so widespread, very few people are even aware that it is the source of the sexual violence, ignorance, and shame that pervade the Christian experience of sex. If you haven't guessed it yet, I'm talking about the ethical assumption that married equals moral. Since the time of the Reformation, Christian ethics in the West has tied sex to gender and relationships with this assumption that sexual morality requires marriage. And this has turned every aspect of sexuality into a confusing web of moral uncertainty. The primary issue with this ethical assumption is that it reduced the Christian understanding of sex to a biological, reproductive activity, turning the complex internal experience of sexual wholeness into an external, socially enforceable standard of when and with whom a male is allowed to follow the urges of his little head without consequence. Apart from fertility, the female experience of sexuality has been almost entirely overlooked in the Christian community. This is why I sometimes say the question of sexual ethics is all about women. As the age of marriage has risen from 12 and 15 to 21, 27, and now late 30s, Christians who have gone through puberty struggle to understand how marriage is the only thing that can make it moral to share physical intimacy with someone they love. Aside from getting a marriage license, though, there is no clear guidance in the church about sexual morality. And what do you do when the time of marriage continues to move further and further away? Sexual wholeness has devolved into a luxury that can only be bought with a wedding ring by those who successfully find their other half. Until then, the after effects of purity culture offer a clear but harmful simplicity. Everything to do with sex is a sin. Until the wedding night, when it becomes authorized by monogamy, heterosexuality, and possibly ejaculatory sex in missionary position. In this, it does have the support of a historical Christian, quote-unquote, tradition, shaped more by sexism, patriarchal oppression, and the dehumanization of women than by Christ. If you want to know more about this, I can direct you to some of the most famous church fathers in the Western tradition. St. Augustine, St. Jerome, St. John Chrysostom, among others, would all agree with the traditional rabbinical prayer, "Thank God I was not born a woman." The only thing a Christian needs to know about sex is whether or not the man has legally married the woman. Then she has to do whatever, whenever he wants in the bedroom, or risk losing the security of her relationship with him and possibly with God as well. If you question whether or not this is the pervasive experience of married sex among Christian evangelicals, I invite you to check out the extensive research by Sheila Ray Gregoire in the book The Great Sex Rescue. While Sheila does an incredible job of highlighting the pain caused by this situation, there is no one who has successfully risked the social consequences of uncovering the root of this problem. Sexual violence in all of its forms is the logical conclusion of a bad sexual ethic. Unfortunately, many Christians are too afraid to question the dominant ethical paradigm that married sex is moral sex. Those who do win the label of heretic and invite banishment from their church communities. The reason for this is understandable, though. A false dichotomy has emerged in ethical conversations about sex, in which the only alternative to monogamous heterosexual marriage is licentiousness, or unrestrained, addictive sexual behavior. Christians have to choose between a marriage license or a free license to do whatever you want, and the latter is not recommended by God. But I would argue that neither is the former. Both of these choices are problematic. Here's why. Unethical sexual behavior is just as present inside of marriage as it is outside of marriage. If you're not aware of this, it's probably happening in your marriage. But my goal here is not to cast shame or blame, but to correct the problem. A close contextual reading of the word porneia in the New Testament reveals the truth that sexual morality is not determined by marital status, but by one's own relationship to their sexuality. If you want to dive into the research and all the relevant biblical texts behind this claim, I invite you to check out my book, Sacred Not Sinful, A New Christian Sexual Ethic. When you start looking into the meaning of biblical terms and the context in which they appear, a totally different view of sexual ethics starts to emerge than the ones you have probably heard. For humans, sex is not just about an act of reproduction. It is connected to our divine purpose to represent the image of the Creator in the cosmos. This is what I call sexuality. Because sexuality is so integral to the human experience, a failure to mature in this part of life can completely undermine the Christian calling to intimacy with God and with others. This happened to me. And it's why I'm so passionate about helping Christian men integrate faith and sexuality. Listen, biblical sexual ethics are an invitation to integrity, freedom, and skill that touches every part of life. This is sexual wholeness. Without it, fear, violence, and simple immaturity lay a foundation for a lifetime of disconnection, uncertainty, and loneliness. Sexual ignorance is the number one enemy of intimacy with God and with others. But it is possible to overcome this challenge by learning about the body, by understanding the mind, by accessing the spirit, and developing skill in relationships. This means that every one of us has the same opportunity to experience a deep, rewarding, mind-blowing, ecstatic connection with God, with ourselves, and with others. With the right tools, resources, and practice, it is possible for any and every Christian man to experience sexual satisfaction instead of shame. Send me a message through my website at courageousintimacy.org, and I'll be happy to connect you with some of the tools and teachers who helped me find this integration of sex and spirituality. You can also apply to join a community of Christian men with deep value for Scripture, for personal integrity, for powerful relationships, and for spiritual truth. We believe that sexual satisfaction is a reward of sexual wholeness, of integrity, freedom, and skill, not a license you buy with a wedding ring. Let me say that again. Sexual satisfaction is the outcome of sexual wholeness, not a license you buy with a wedding ring. The good news is that this means your experience of sexuality is entirely within your control. The bad news is that it requires great courage to trade an ethic of entitlement for one of personal responsibility. That's why I'm here to remind you, the reward is worth it. Sexual wholeness is not about meeting some external standard of when or with whom you're allowed to be turned on. but about integrating the gift of sexuality into every part of a beautiful, powerful, and satisfying life. This ethical choice is not easy, though, in a church that is ignorant about the psychological, spiritual, relational, and even biological dynamics of sex. It took me years to overcome my own ignorance, and I still discover something new just about every day. Get on my website and send me a message if you want to know the latest. I'm happy to share. I don't have all the answers, at least not yet, but the quest for sexual wholeness is one each man must choose for himself. Nobody can give you the answer you are looking for. You have to discover what sexual wholeness looks like in your own life. There is no shortcut to this happiness, but it can be helpful to follow a map or even share the adventure around a table with other men who celebrate, support, and equip each other for success, no matter what our similarities or differences look like. If you want to join us, go to discover.courageousintimacy.org and send me a message. Let's put together a personal roadmap, define your goals, and get you the resources, community, and tools you need for success on this journey to sexual wholeness.